Hello, friends. It's the Carnivore Rabbi here, as always, to meet, pray, and love. I hope you're all well. Hope you're enjoying summer, beginning of summer, at least here in Chicago, starting to get hot, almost 89 degrees today. And summer, we go outside. And one of the great myths of nutrition is that athletes need carbs. I remember hearing this in even maybe as early as elementary school. I was a tennis player. And of course, you grow up and play other sports. And I was always told you need carbs for energy. And I used to be a serious runner till I got injured. And I even bought that goo that you're supposed to take on long runs, that goo, which is pure sugar. Hard to forgive myself now. I wonder how many carbs are in one little pack. Probably in the double digits. I'm sure in the double digits. Perhaps you've even heard that old myth of eating right after you work out to replenish the energy, the carbs. And supposedly that'll burn the fat faster. These are what in Judaism we call Baba. Baba Misa is really total nonsense, a wives' tale. I've always wondered how these nutrition Baba Misas came about. How could otherwise smart people say such things? And how could I believe them? Well, the believing part is understandable. This book I'm reading, I'm going to talk about later at the end, is called Collective Illusions by Todd Rose, and it explains why false beliefs persist even in the face of overwhelming evidence. So stay tuned for that. And there's overwhelming evidence that you should hit that subscribe button if you haven't already and get the latest carnivore news and insights and stories. It's because of you, this article I'm about to discuss, I got from a viewer in Australia. And it's because of you that I can continue to comment on and spread the carnivore message. So this carb-loading nonsense still persists in the athletic world. But we are getting more and more examples of people doing the opposite and succeeding magnificently. Dr. Chafee, in fact, interviewed a guy who ran, I believe, 5 marathons over 5 straight days eating no carbs. I'm not sure I would recommend doing that, 5 marathons in 5 days, but if it's possible, and that seems to be a true story, that's amazing. And a viewer in Australia just sent me this story. It's about a rugby player, and he said it resonated with a video I did a few days ago talking about the way human beings evolved on the carnivore diet. You can see it right above. It's about a rugby player named Josh Otto Carr, and he's a superstar player in Australia, I think Melbourne. He's also a bit of a nonconformist. I like that. He was fined $1,000 and placed under investigation after he broke strict lockdown protocols with a fellow player by going on a weekend camping trip during the pandemic. And then a few months later, he was fined an additional $50,000 for breaching some real strict self-isolation protocols. So Australia had some very strict lockdowns. Be that as it may, whatever you think of that, he has been an extraordinarily successful player. But he was recently going through a rough patch, and he wants to make it onto the equivalent of the rugby all-star team in his league, like the Pro Bowl or the All-Star game in America. So, in order to kickstart himself, he changed his diet and embraced the carnivore diet. And predictably, the press calls it a strange lifestyle change. Sure, it may seem strange today, but it's also the original human way of eating. In fact, this is what motivated him. He said in an interview, "I really thought about what my ancestors used to eat. And that's how it came up. Strictly meat. I just tried it and transformed my body into the way I wanted it. It helped me perform and train the best I could. It really helped my sleep as well. No nightmares." What a clear, powerful explanation. And of course, predictably, he's already getting mocked. A nutritionist and sports commentator in Australia mocked him. This is what this columnist wrote. "The evidence suggests that if you go from a high carb to a low carb diet, your performance will decrease at higher intensities. What evidence? This nutritionist doesn't cite anything. And may return or partially return after extended period of adaptation. So this nutritionist is basically saying he's going to perform really badly for a while. That's a hard sell, to get worse before returning to the same performance, when you could just eat carbs. Sure, just continue eating carbs. Just do the same thing that everyone's been doing. Just do the same diet that's led to horrible health. Now, of course, the commentator is going to give us the big cholesterol scare. Even if you're shredded, he writes, it seems that consuming a lot of saturated fat and no fiber, oh no, can significantly elevate your LDL cholesterol. That's one of the particles that is most responsible for those plaques building up in your vessels. Oh no. Real fear-mongering here. What else does this commentator say? Even active, appropriately BMI'd individuals can die early from a cardiac event if they have a lifetime of increased LDL. So this guy is going to go on an all-meat diet, and suddenly this incredible athlete is going to die from a cardiac event. This is what this nutritionist is saying. Did he even proofread this? Restrictive dieting and disordered eating, disordered eating, is a can of worms far beyond my ability to discuss in this post. Well, you just got one thing right, commentator. This is far beyond your ability to discuss. Clearly, your intellectual and your empathetic ability. And then this commentator goes on to talk about how rugby players are role models and they shouldn't be engaging in such strange diets, and that, quote, they should be cautious about the messages they put out on the internet. So in other words, this commentator wants to censor a successful athlete for talking about his diet. Incredible. And it happens to be that his diet is the original human diet. In fact, we should be grateful for athletes like this who put themselves out, who take a risk to show that conventional nutrition is dead wrong. These kinds of athletes, and really anyone speaking truth to power, are far too rare. Now let's return to the question of why that is so rare. This is from the book Collective Illusions by Todd Rose. Highly recommend it. First, once a narrative sets in, he writes, it's very hard to undo. Quote, our commitment to one particular narrative makes us immune to new information, which makes this sort of cascade, that's the cascade of truth, very hard to undo. It doesn't really matter whether the story we're colluding with is true or not. To everyone else, however, it looks like we and all the others who are going along can't possibly be wrong. In other words, when lots of people believe something, it's hard to believe that they're all wrong. We buy into this narrative. And the second thing is we buy into a narrative that is given by people whose views we care about. And we care about what authorities think. That's just part of human nature. And what our peer groups think. We attach great importance to it. In the nutrition world, the authorities have this narrative of plant-based diet. So when we challenge it, we feel less safe, even unconsciously, because we're going against the authorities. As he writes, we care most about the people with whom we feel the deepest respect, whose praise or condemnation matter the most, our in-groups. Remember, people with the title doctor. These close members of our perceived tribes might share our religion, our politics, our nationality, or our family ties. They might be our school or work buddies. They might be fellow fans of our favorite bands or sports teams or belong to one of our Facebook groups. Inclusion in our in-groups makes us feel happier, safer, and more certain of ourselves and our place in the world. In other words, people we respect and people we can relate to, we really are afraid of departing from their views. So we convince ourselves to agree with them even when we know deep down that they are wrong. There was a study at Stanford in 2015 that, quote, suggested that people shift their personal opinions due to the biological satisfaction triggered in our brains whenever we agree with others. It doesn't feel good to stand alone. A beautiful interpretation in the story of Abraham. I just thought of this story of Abraham in the Bible where it says, why did God choose Abraham to be the father of a new religion? Because Abraham was willing to stand out when everyone else He was the only person who saw that there was just one God in the universe. The world stood on one side, Abraham on the other. Third reason, not enough people speak up, he writes. The result is a pernicious, self-fulfilling prophecy. By making blind and ultimately false assumptions about the opinions of those around us and worrying that we are in a minority, we become more likely to perpetuate the very views we and others do not hold. In other words, the less we speak out, the more these conventional wrong narratives take hold. We have to speak out if we're going to stop them. That's why I have this channel. That's why there are so many good carnivore channels. So what else do we do about it? Well, first, we celebrate more athletes like Josh who speak up. 2, we examine our core behaviors. Quote, the first step in divorcing ourselves from bad norms is not to ignore them, but instead to be vigilant about them. All of them. Look closely at what we do and believe. Third, perhaps most importantly, we have to keep learning. Find different sources of knowledge. Quote, interacting with a greater diversity of people also provides us with better information and a well-rounded perspective that makes us less likely to fall for the illusions of a single group. In this way, expanding our social portfolio, he writes, is one of the most valuable things we can do for ourselves. In other words, keep learning, keep expanding, keep finding new perspectives. If you haven't found the perspective of Dr. Chafee, who's we might know, but he's new for many others, watch and share this video of an interview that I did with him. The knowledge that he shares is priceless, and the more we learn, the more we grow, the more we can spread this saving message to the world.